welcome to yet everybody in the interwebs and on the YouTubes and all of the other portals to weirdness. This is Mike McDonald's co-host of FSUFO, Forbidden Science UFO. Chris drops the UFO, just calls it Forbidden Science because he's a big fan of Jacques Vallée. We're really happy to be on the air here. Chris, are you rocking to the music?
I can't help it, and that's one more thing here that's all your fault, of course. You being the composer, programmer, etc.
Yeah, just a little ditty I came up with. So listen, we've got a super guest today on our show. Rob Swiatek is in the wings in the green room, shipping a little bubbly champagne, and tell us about Rob there, Chris. Give us the background on that.
Yeah, Rob's somebody I've known for a long time here in the field, and has been a great friend. Rob's been researching UFOs. It goes back, when you look at his bio, to the waning late days of the University of Colorado study. So he must have been a young guy like me, just raring to get into it at the time. And that was a very heady time. And in a way, it kind of reminds me of what's going on nowadays. Disclosure is such a big thing now. And I can remember at that time, there was a feeling in the general public. You'd see it would come up even on things like the Tonight Show. You'd be watching, and people thought the answers were going to come out. There was a lot of expectations, a lot of disappointment in the end, and it's all part of the UFO history. Anyway, Rob, he got sucked in back then. The whole ball of wax has interested him, and he's been involved in ways many of us haven't. He sat for years, and I believe still is, on the executive committee of the Fund for UFO Research. They're less active in the days of the internet. He has been on the board of directors for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, which has a long history, over half a century, and we might talk a bit about that. He's a double major in physics, earth science, and he's been involved with NASA, so many things. The bulk of his career has been spent at the U.S. Patent Office. And I've known him, like I say, as a friend and someone who, if I had not canceled my second application to the fund because somebody stepped in from the world of television to pay for my underwater search in Shag Harbor, he would have been my project manager. And it's great that we have him here today. And we're going to have a whole lot to talk about, and I can't wait to get going. So, Rob, welcome very much to FSUFO and to Nova Scotia, our audience, which we'd like to think is worldwide. It's early days here, and those tendrils are just starting to get out. But welcome, here you are.
It's great to be on FSUFO,
Yeah,
Chris, and
yeah,
to see you again after a number of years.
yeah. When was the last time? I think it was Toronto. Were you up for that just before
Yeah,
COVID?
gee, it was a while back. I think it
Yeah, I
was
think.
well beyond the turn of the century, though.
Well, I don't know. We've crossed paths a few
That's
times. I know that sort of thing. Anyway, I think, yeah, Rochester. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. We've met a few times, and hopefully this fall we'll chat about that at the end. You're going to make it up, COVID willing, that we pull off the Shag Harbor UFO Expo this year, of which we have you booked in. Anyway, we could start a lot of places, and we're going to go back and forward, I think, through time. Um, I'm intrigued on your bio. I just reread it when we managed to fit you in here today in this slot. You mentioned the Condon Committee, and like say, you must have been awfully young when that happened, and I was. But I remember, that sort of mirrors our current thing. There was such an expectation that we were going to get some answers, and the government was going to rubber stamp this, and we were going to know. And of course, we all know how that one turned out. So, how did that lure you in so much? Or
Well, there were a lot of books coming out at that time on the subject, concurrent with the Colorado study, and the sightings just intrigued me so much. I wanted to get further into them, and that's what hooked me in. And then I started
Mhm.
reading about the Colorado study, and like you just mentioned, I thought it would be wrapped up in a few years once this scientific study
Mm,
went through. And here we are, 50 years later, and it's we're not much progressed with regard to our knowledge.
mm. Well, Rob, when you say read about the structure, you know what I read that I found the most intriguing thing about the study. I read the actual study, of course. I've got
Mhm.
to this day, I've got my original hardcover copy of it, which I guess is worth some money now. But see, I bet you're familiar with this book here, if I can hold that up.
Oh yes, the Saunders book. Mhm.
Yes, the Saunders book, which many people take as a sort of alternate conclusion, of course, which it very much is. But what a fascinating book! I imagine you've read it, or have you? Or
Yes, I have several times. It's a very
y-
valuable insight into Condon and thinking that went on in the early days of the study. And
yeah,
Saunders
the
wasn't around
trick.
to the end of it because he had been fired.
Yeah, him and Norm Levine, who did really the
Correct.
lion's share of the research, the two of them, eh? And when you read that, it's just it reads like some lurid tell-all book because the behavior of many of these people that were highly respected scientists had loads of alphabet soup after their name, right? Should have known and should have behaved better in some cases. And of course, Condon and certainly Lowe and other people like that were serving on the committee. But when you read that, it's almost in the realm of the unbelievable. Things like the marching band for the predicted landing that never happened, and all just the weirdness. And Condon, such a real character. And anybody that wants to get a sense of the 60s and what was happening and that sort of view of it, it's a must read book. It's hard to find now, but if you can find one at a conference, at the U stand in your old store, it's worth the purchase price. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you can always go on A Books and find that the hardcover copy or the paperback.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I thought was intriguing with the Condon study right from the beginning was they should have been looking at cases that had already been investigated and ruled unknown by NICAP, not just recapitulate what the U.S. Air Force
Mm,
was doing, which is to say, look at all types of reports and then say, oh, well,
mm.
these were explained and these were not explained. Uh, I think the remit was to look at the unidentified sightings and say, what do these represent? But of course, they didn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many great examples. I'll tell you one that always stuck with me there, Rob, was is this. When you look at the book, of course, thank God in one sense that Condon warns people, like right up front, he gives his conclusion, right at the beginning of the book. So if you don't want to read anymore, if you're disgusted and throw it at the wall, then you can do so, right? And it works good as a doorstop and whatever too. But it is a book worth reading just the same because there is a lot of stuff in there. But the part that gets me is when you look at things like the intense examination of, say, the McMinnville photos, the Trent photos, and the conclusions. How could he possibly conclude there's nothing of scientific merit to this? When you read it,
Agenda.
the- yeah, there's so many positive cases that in the book kind of it makes the case. I mean, you could look at
Oh,
the book and you
absolutely.
don't have, yeah, and conclude the opposite of what Condon did. Yeah,
Yeah, in McMinnville, they said there's no conclusion other than that a real object as such as is shown in the photograph
exactly,
flew by.
exactly.
What more do you
Yeah,
need? They
yeah,
had
and
30% of the cases they couldn't explain.
and all the technology since that photo is held up. You know what I mean? And computer edging, all the other many things it's been subjected to, and it withstands. And how can you conclude otherwise? And that photo goes back to such early days. And it's such a human story when you read about how, the negatives were underneath the couch and they were scratched when you see the replications of them from the kids playing
Right.
there in the dust bunnies, like nobody was trying to make money or bring attention to it. It's so pure.
That's
You
correct.
got to love it. Yeah, it's so
Yeah,
pure.
a little side note to the McMinnville things. Bruce Maccabee did a big investigation of these sightings and
Mm,
did a nice publication for the Fund for UFO Research. But Bruce had the original negatives for decades, and nobody knew where they were. And he finally came forth in like
mm,
2005 or something, and said, "Oh, I have the originals here. They're not with some
mm.
banker or something that they were supposed to have been deposited with, or Life magazine.
Yeah.
He had them the whole time." And I think
Well,
they've
yeah.
since been returned to McMinnville's the daughter or something like that in the family.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, Bruce here, as we keep calling him, is Bruce Maccabee, who was also a member of the Fund for UFO Research. And Bruce was one of the top optical physicists in the U.S. Navy and has been involved in, with many examinations of the visual evidence of UFOs.
Mhm.
I met with him several times, and just another great guy here. But yeah, when you look at how strong and how pure those early cases are, that's something we'll never get in. I mean, you got to remember this comes from the day when the cliche, "A picture is worth 1,000 words," meant something, because it sure doesn't now, right? And
Correct.
Michael would know about that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
well, I can't visualize the picture. Can you describe it, Chris?
well, that's that classic. M- Rob, you could probably do it better. It's a classic saucer, isn't it? And there's two great
Right.
snaps. It it's one I always love to show when I do a lecture, when I do it, because, like people say to me, how come when we look these books or we talk to serious researchers, we always see these same old fuzzy black and white photos or whatever, with all the good video now. But, when you put it in context and explain it, people get it. And of them, that's certainly one of the best there. Why don't you describe it for us? I'm sure you're familiar.
Just
So.
before you do that, Rob, if somebody was to try to Google that picture, would they find it?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
What would be the
There's
search terms?
there are two pictures, as I recall. One taken of what looks like an old helmet with a spike on the top. It's a saucer shaped thing. And then the second photo shows it slightly. It had traveled slightly
Oh, yes.
further to the
I
left in the
know this
picture, I think, and
photograph.
so you see it
Yeah.
It
a
has
little
the
bit more
antenna on
in
the top of it or
profile.
whatever it is. So what would be
Yeah.
the search terms if somebody watching the show wanted to quickly bring that up, and maybe even our producer if he can find it?
What, Chris McMinnville? Trent,
1950, McMinnville, Paul
TRENT2.
Trent. Yeah.
Paul Trent,
Paul Trent.
1950 UFO photo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
They appeared in Life
Okay. We'll see if
magazine.
Sean can maybe
Yeah.
bring that up while we're still talking about it.
Yeah. It is
I
one of
now
the
know it.
class.
It's black and white, kind of grainy, right? Tri-X film photograph,
Uh,
as I
it,
recall.
it's actually pretty good res for that old black and white.
But
Yeah,
it is black
that's
and
he's
white, correct?
correct.
Yeah.
Y-
Hmm.
yeah.
Black and white,
It's
absolutely.
actually. Yeah, it's in good focus, and it's a good resolution. The other thing about that is, like, of course, the biggest thing is, unlike hundreds or if not more, if not thousands of those early photos, this one passes all the tests. And boy, is there we go.
There
There
it
we
is.
go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Very
I've
famous.
Yeah,
always
we see
thought,
the underside of it there.
yeah,
Hmm.
The spike above. If it were blowing up, you'd see it has a little projection on the top.
You could almost picture it wobbling in the air like they tend to wobble. It just looks like it's
Yeah, this one didn't
on
yeah.
though.
the up curve of a wobble. Yeah.
No, no, this one flew smooth and silent, and
That's correct.
Oh,
yeah,
really? Hmm.
yep. And he took it,
Amazing
and it was
photograph.
only over time it got mentioned to the local newspaper that printed it, and word spread out. I have to laugh. I can remember meeting Phil Class, and he made a whole lot about how well it got them a free trip to New York on a TV show and all this. But like I say, when you really look into the human element of this story and how they really didn't value what they had as they should have, it's quite incredible. So
Hmm.
it was the
That's
golden
exactly
age.
right.
Picture was worth 1,000 words, and
It's a
but
beautiful
yeah, like you
photograph.
say, it is. It
Well,
is. It's
I
such a
have
class.
uh, occasion to go through the MUFON files now on photographs and videos almost on a month-to-month basis. I look through them to find out what has been taken, and it's kind of funny that the cameras on phones are ubiquitous now, and the
Hmm.
photography is not much better.
Yeah.
There's
No.
dots of light in the sky, but there are
Mm,
always some that stand out as very, very good photographs that show things I can't explain at all. Very well
mhm,
defined rectangular objects, uh, every once in a while a saucer shaped object, and but they're just not 100 times more than they were in 1950. They're
Well,
about the
exactly. And
same
just going back to
percentage.
that that comment that you made, Rob, about the quality of all of the photographs. I always get a kick out of the skeptics who deride a photograph and they say, can't people take a proper photograph? Well, okay, you go on out to the woods and try and take a photograph of a fox. Okay, it's going to be hit and miss, and unless you're staging this thing, it's going to be like that, and that's not an excuse to say that the phenomena is contrived.
You're
I'm sure you
100%
would agree.
correct.
Yeah.
If you were to just hear an airplane going overhead above your house and run out with your camera and try to take a picture, I'll warrant you'll find that it's a far more difficult process to get a nice
Yeah.
photograph of that airplane than you
Absolutely.
might think.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When you see those great nature shots, I guarantee you there's been a photographer sitting in a blind for months sometimes to get a couple of seconds of footage or a few stills, and that
Many
people
hours.
just see the end product and think, why can't these UFO guys do this, right? And of course,
Or
I
the
mean,
darn thing is just staged, right?
yeah, I
The
mean,
good
I see
ones.
what Justin went through, remember, on Cape Sable in 2018. I mean, it's not easy to get that good shot, you know.
No.
So
It catches you by surprise. And UFO reports, UFO sightings don't last 15 or 20 minutes at a time. They maybe
Right.
last a minute or two if you're extraordinarily lucky.
well, we
Speaking
must
of
have
It is
been.
hard to take a
spectacular
picture.
photographs that where everything came together, the 1952 wave over Washington comes to mind, and then also the L.A. Objects that were caught in the searchlights during the Second World War. I mean, those are spectacular photographs, um, and of course, very well known. So
The,
occasionally, you're in the right time, you're at the right time and in the right place
mm,
with the right equipment, and you get the shot. But it's not the norm.
Yeah, I'll probably show a few good photographs when I'm at the UFO Expo there at Shag Harbor, because that's my intention to have at least one or two videos and one or two good recent photographs of UFOs that have passed muster with investigators.
Makes
mhm.
me think about the Florida photographs. What was his name?
Oh,
He lived down
Gulf
by the
Breeze, you're
beach.
probably thinking of.
Gulf Breeze
Yeah.
photographs. Those are
The,
spectacular, but they've
yeah,
been an object of quite a bit of controversy over the years.
yeah.
I
To
don't
say
know
the
what's your
least.
opinion about that. Yeah.
The, yeah,
Can we spend two
yeah,
minutes on that? The Gulf Breeze photographs? He was a contractor, right? He was a contractor. He
Ed
had a whole
Walters
backstory to go
was
with it.
his name, and
Right.
mm,
Dr. Maccabee literally wrote the book on those sightings. He's contributed to Ed Walters' first book, who was the witness on those original photographs and many others he had after that. Then there was a
Mm-hmm.
second book, I think, that Bruce also did on the sightings.
Mm-hmm.
I have kind of a negative impression and opinion of that whole case, having read and gone through hours and hours with the fund
mm,
back in 1988, 1990, and 1989. Uh, it's not a straightforward case of hoaxing, but I think at the end of all the analysis that I don't have great faith that they are genuine photographs. And
Right.
here we're
Right.
mhm.
talking several dozen photographs at the very least.
Right. If it's too
Mm.
good, if it looks too good to be true, well, you know what they say,
Yeah.
Well,
because they
I'll
are
tell you another.
spectacular photographs.
Yeah, another classic case I think that gives us such great visual when you really understand the context of the case. I think, of course, is Great Falls, Montana, where
Mm.
you have that video, not video really, but old Super 8 film, right? In the
Mm-hmm.
daytime of those two white sphere-like things that are going past the smokestacks there, and
Mm-hmm.
when you really look into that, that's another one that seems to pass muster. I think, or am I don't know, Rob.
No,
How do
no,
you
you're
feel on
correct,
that?
Chris. That is held up through a number of
Yeah,
investigations.
yeah,
And then you have Tremonton, Utah, I think, which was around the same period of time,
mm,
1952. That showed a number of objects in the sky. And when the CIA looked at that sighting briefly in January 1953, they looked at it for 5 minutes, and a few of the scientists said, wow, those don't look like the way birds fly against the sky. And so that's
Mm.
obviously what the photographer captured. That had been
Mm-hmm.
thought of
mm,
and gone through by investigators at that time. I think in the government, I think the Navy looked at that. But they, to me, it's a good sighting and a good video.
Another thing is actually Condon covered that really well in terms of the Great Falls, Montana one, of how hard they fought to. They believe that the clip that they submitted to the United States Air Force, that some of it didn't come back whole. That they took the first few seconds off, that were the best, and kept them. Because I know the fellow that I can't think of his name right now that actually shot the film footage there. He fought hard to get it back and take them to court and everything. It's quite a lot of drama, and it's all in there in the Condon report. Again, one more reason that makes it so hard to understand that conclusion up front, And
correct. These are classic photographs and films that were taken of UFOs. Alas, they're 70 years old, and when you speak with scientists today, they want to hear, well, what was taken last week? What was taken yesterday? Don't tell me about a sighting in 1947. The Rhodes photograph, for example, or 1952, but they want recent things. And I can't blame them, I suppose.
Yeah, speaking of recent and unsung material, I can't help but think about the STS missions, especially the tether incident when the space shuttle, they were conducting an experiment with the energized tether, which was fairly long, and it drifted about several hundred kilometers away from the space shuttle. So it was an idea of collecting energy, right? And so it drifted away, it snapped, and then these great big, almost amoeba-like objects floating around it, hundreds and hundreds, and one of them huge took up 1/3 of the tether, and it passes behind it. It clearly passes behind it. I don't know what to think about that.
In all candor, I have to admit, I've never seen that particular photograph, Mike.
It's actually video. It's incredible. Video, these things, they look like a disc, flat disc. It looks like they have a nucleus, and they have a little piece that spins around, and they just move around. They swarm the tether, which has gone upwards of several hundred kilometers away from the space shuttle. And one of them is so large, it takes up 1/3. And I believe the tether was, close to 10 kilometers long. And it takes up 1/3 and passes behind the tether. And it's easy to find on the internet. And then there's all of the images of objects rising up from the earth, passing by, what looks like missiles or some objects being fired from the earth coming up through the atmosphere. There's just tons of that video.
I've seen some of those. Yeah, the fund had and Chris is probably familiar with this. Dr. Jack Kasher, I think his name was, did a big investigation into sightings taken from STS-48 or something like that.
Yes.
And he published those, and it's quite an intriguing analysis. He couldn't explain what those things were, and there were multiple objects seen in these the video.
Well, there it is on the screen now. There it is on the screen. There's a still image from the tether incident, and that's the object I'm talking about. It's got a notch in it. Looks like a nucleus. Can you see that, Rob, on the screen? And that's the tether.
Yeah, okay.
And the Earth, not the Earth, that's actually out into space. All those little dots are other floating objects in real time in video. And what's interesting is that when you're listening to the conversation between the communications with the shuttle, they're not saying anything about it. Not a word.
Yeah.
Like, really, even if this was a non-UFO related video, you'd at least be saying, okay, we've got some technical issues here. What are these things swarming around? You would just bring it up. It just blows my mind that they didn't even mention it.
Sometimes the shuttle's crew's silence on these events speaks a lot more loudly than if they had really spoken. If you can understand what I just said there.
Absolutely, yeah, that makes total sense. Total sense.
Yeah.
Chris, what do you think? Have you seen the tether? Have you seen the tether incident, Chris, on video?
Yeah, I have. And when I see the objects and the movement and that, what it brings to my mind, you're going back a few years. I don't know if Rob remembers this, but there were a couple books that came out by a New Zealander who was a researcher about living sky creatures. And what was his name? Trevor Constable, I think was the name.
All right.
And that was a bit of a thing that's kind of gone away out of the field. But he believed that these things were around, and sometimes, and he took a lot of pictures, I know, with ultraviolet film, and they would sometimes appear to be there. And he thought that these things would, if they were bothered or there was something influencing them, it could be streaming particles, it could be powerful radar beams, they would become visible naturally. But he thought that they were around all the time and were invisible, and they could be filmed with ultraviolet light. And he seemed to have some success with this. But when I look at the actual appearance and the motion and the behavior, it looks like some of the stuff he shot back in the 60s and that. Now, that's one of these sort of minor views of one of the causes of some sightings and the phenomena that has kind of faded away. But I can tell you that, like, currently I'm working on a case. I'm not prepared to go public with it too much yet. I think Rob might know what I'm referring to here. But one of the interesting things is I found out is that members of the Canadian Navy at the time back then um, accepted that this was a common thing, and they say sometimes these things would get injured and come down from 50 miles up, and they normally didn't live below that in the atmosphere. But they have that appearance. It's just what visually it makes me think of that in that work, which has been forgotten and maybe
Yeah,
forgotten
they
too
do look
soon.
like living creatures. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
they
and
resemble living creatures.
and that's why I've always been attracted to these sightings where you have kind of a cat and mouse behavior. And of course, we've seen that in the 52 Washington wave, didn't we? When
Absolutely.
yeah,
Let's just
cat and
do a
mouse.
little orientation on the Washington Wave, Rob. Could you just give us the Coles notes of the elevator pitch on what happened there that in 1952?
Yeah, I'll try to do that, Mike. It occurred on 2 weekends. Sightings occurred over Washington National Airport. Now it's called Washington Reagan Airport. And it was in July of 1952. And the first weekend was the 19th and 20th. And the second weekend was the 26th and 27th, where both visual sightings were obtained from people on the ground, visual sightings obtained from pilots by aircraft, and the objects were picked up by 3 different radar systems, I guess, the approach radar for national, and a more distant radar that picked up airplanes coming in from at about 100 miles away or so, and then radar at Andrews Air Force Base. And jet fighters were scrambled from Delaware and were vectored in on these objects. They did have some sightings. The objects sometimes traveled at enormous rates of speed, as seen on radar, made right angle turns, penetrated the prohibited airspace over the White House and the Capitol, and completely flummoxed the air traffic controllers and the pilots who were in the aircraft.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's a very good description. Funny they don't work during the week, just weekends.
Well,
2
yeah,
weekends.
it
Unusual.
was hot that
Very
Yeah.
time, and they
strange.
needed, they came in the night when it was
Yeah.
a little cooler.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's a great portrayal of that in toward the end of the unidentified flying objects, the motion picture, which is a classic thing that I would recommend for anyone to watch nowadays to see how different researchers and the world saw the phenomena back then. This is at a time when these things didn't crash; they were considered all weather craft, and it was also a time when there was a lot of concerns, and you get the sense when you watch at the early days of the Cold War and war jitters still left over from World War II, and it was often referred to as the UFO problem back then. I noticed, the
Hmm.
UFO. It wasn't just a question or are we alone? It was kind of framed from that point of view, and you
Correct.
and you, yeah. It was a
Yeah,
matter of
James
national
McDonald
security.
used the UFO problem. That was the way he always characterized it in his
Uh,
speeches and in his talks. I still
One of
do
my
that
true
because I think it
heroes.
is a problem.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
definitely a problem.
And
I mean,
the way the objects were described at the 1940s, at the end of the 1940s, in classified documents of the U.S. government, is almost identical to the way these objects were portrayed in the Defense Intelligence Report that came out last June here in the United States. The
Mm.
UFO phenomenon was characterized in the same terms as officials of the government described them in these documents in the late 40s. It's completely mind-bending to me. And they couldn't explain them in the 1940s, and they outfoxed our craft. And 70 years later, they're describing these objects in the same terms and saying, we don't know what's going on. This could represent a breakthrough in aerospace technology. And you've had 70 years to work on this since these initial documents came out in the 70s. And you as a government have done nothing. The US government's done nothing, seemingly. I'm really disturbed what I read in that report from June when I compared it with what was known in 1948 and 1947.
Yeah, well,
But
you know what,
appear
Rob?
to
they're
have
I,
reinvented
referencing
the
the
wheel.
Tic Tac.
yeah,
Yeah, right. And they're referencing the Tic Tac, right? The Tic Tac videos
yeah,
and others.
And others. I think the important thing is and others.
and
And they
others,
looked
yeah.
at 144 sightings. They explained one. They said we can't
That's
explain the
right.
other 143.
Only one. And you know
And
something,
a
when you
balloon.
look at the, yeah,
Yeah.
look, we've heard that one before. But here's the thing.
Very much.
You know what this has got to do? It's not so much national security. This has got to do with national insecurity. These guys have huge budgets. They have all our cutting edge thing, and they really don't have the answers. Look, I'm the first one to say they know more than they're saying. But I don't believe that they have the big secrets. I don't believe disclosure is ever going to bring that out. We need the efforts that they do. And I just find it's very misrepresenting. It's really about that. You know, the Tic Tac sightings are one thing. I think the Atlantic sightings of the cube with the orb inside is more significant because those upgraded F-16s, they always had the radar returns. They could track them till they were out of frame over the horizon or whatever. You know, I mean, they had a lot of hard data concluding that these things were zipping around in ways we just cannot do within the atmosphere. And they should be a whole lot more concerned than they are, considering, you know, it's a matter of national security.
I want to say that somebody maybe really thinks that within the US government. But I agree with you, Chris. They don't have the big secret as to what the technology is
No.
behind these things.
Thank you, Rob.
The
I'm
whole history
so
of
relieved.
aviation would have taken a different path in the past 70 years if they
Yes.
had that
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
You know,
Sure
because one
enough.
of the things that's disturbing me lately, I've had a number of people in the disclosure camp contact me and suggest to me that it would be best if I just stop doing what I'm doing, me and people like me, that we should just, it's completely redundant to investigate cases and whatever. And, you know, I'll say here, of course, and I think anyone can guess the response is, you know, like that ain't going to happen, right? You know, I look, I believe that people do need to lobby governments. I think disclosure and that it's legitimate, needs to happen, but not to the exclusion of the other activity in the field. You know, we need to learn to get along. We need to contribute all and encourage and support each other. And but I find that disturbing that, you know, we're just going to sit back and wait, because I think, for example, that things like the Tic Tac sightings, which get more attention than the other current ones, or recent ones, I should say, is the fact that, you know, if there hadn't been that leak, if Elizondo and his group hadn't put it out, I don't think the Pentagon would have released that. I don't know what you think, Rob. Like, you probably have a feel. You've testified before, what, the press club and Congress and other things, haven't you, to represent?
Not Congress, but once I appeared at the press club.
Oh, the press club. Well, that'll do. Yeah, I mean, sure.
Yeah, C-SPAN, I think it was, and they were at the press club. But anyhow, I agree with you. We have to get along and function better as a field, and we have to have more transparency, because I'm not expecting the government to release anything of importance, as long as we have
No.
security laws and non-transparency. So we've got to investigate the recent sightings, as MUFON is doing, to show that the phenomenon continues. Because, and I'll harken back to what I said a little earlier, if you talk to a scientist, they don't want to hear you talking about a 1951 sighting or a 1955 sighting, as much as all of us here would like to discuss those things sometimes. They want to know what's happening now. And if you look at recent cases that MUFON has investigated and look at the unknowns, it's the same phenomenon. These objects are exhibiting the same maneuvers and the same characteristics they had 70 years ago. They present the same way as a medical professional might say. So we're dealing with the same things. And that's what scientists who are not currently involved in the UFO field should realize. And maybe with Avi Loeb making an entrance into the field, he's a big name, he'll manage to shift the pendulum a little bit here on our studies of UFOs.
I was kind of happy to see that Avi was willing to indulge these subjects, and I think that's great. It's good to see people lend legitimacy to the topic. Two things that pop to mind. What's important in psychology and other disciplines is longitudinal data. We have an excellent opportunity to present longitudinal data. As you said yourself, Rob, we've got sightings going back to the 1940s and earlier. The similarities, the characteristics are virtually unchanged. So we have longitudinal data over time. There's no doubt about that. And so that is a valid argument to not dismiss earlier sightings for the present day. The other thing is that we have nefarious players out there with all kinds of wacky claims and theories. Like, for example, the alien autopsy video. You've got Bob Lazar. I'm not saying one way or another whether I believe Bob Lazar. You've got guys like Dr. His name just put it this way, he takes a lot of steroids. You've got all of these people, lending discredit, and it's almost as if it's like a fifth column sort of thing. And this is not a new thought. It's like distractions. But we have this solid data, like we have witness testimony, um, affidavits, we have video sightings, we have film, we have photographs, and it's amazing how consistent this stuff is. People tend to always gravitate towards the bizarre and the wild claims, and it seems to take a lot of breathing space. And then the whole disclosure movement, which seems to me to be a bit fractured. It just seems that we can't get out of our own way, and sometimes we have players that distract us. And overall, we're back to where we began. It's no different than Ken Arnold, and here it is, 2022.
Well, I'm happy to hear you say that because I've heard Steve Bassett once talk, a big disclosure man, speak to me 20 years ago, or to us, and said we were just basically the UFO investigators of 2000 in the fund and MUFON were just dinosaurs looking at stuff that had been well gone over with in the previous 30 years. We had to move beyond just looking at sightings. And he hasn't done anything with disclosure. And so we still need to keep looking at sightings.
Right.
And because we need to still get this information out, as I say. But we've always had to deal with those people, Mike, that you've been talking about. Some of them are naive, but they have one thing going for them that most investigators and researchers don't have. They have answers, and I'll put that in quotes. They think they have answers, but a lot of people want to hear answers. And if they talk with you, Mike, or Chris, they don't, or me, they don't get answers because I'm not going to make things up. I don't know what's happening.
No, I agree with you, Rob, 100%. Yeah, Chris?
Yeah. There's another real problem I have with disclosure, something they don't seem to address, is the fact that so often, and you know where I'm getting with this, is that in government, one hand knows not what the other is holding on to, right? And I know on this current case that I'm not going to go into in any real detail now, that I've looked back, when I look at the documentation and the setup, one of the things I discovered is that, after World War II, arrangements, treaty arrangements, and working arrangements that were made between Canada here, Great Britain, and the United States after the war in terms of defense research and sharing data is that they'd put these things in place, where, everybody would send a member to like Canada would send someone to Washington to represent us, and Washington would send someone to Britain, and vice versa, so that we all had this functioning thing. This eventually became the Five Eyes and other working arrangements. But, for the first sort of 15 years, the United States never sent anyone here because they didn't think we'd have anything to share. And as it turns out, this case that I'm looking into, we had plenty to share, and we didn't share it because they never sent anyone here to get it to. And the attitude here was, well, guys, you don't know what you're missing, and we don't care. So, but you get departments like that. The other thing is when you set up something like that, they didn't realize that in Canada you had one central research board that controlled the different aspects of the armed forces, whereas down in the US everyone had a specific one, and they weren't even sharing amongst each other. And when I see the revelations of how this worked, it was just a dog's breakfast, and no one was ever going to share the information. And it was only when it became huge or a public scandal that things would actually be shared in a catch up later mode. But I think there's vital stuff in there that was never shared. And it's like Stanton used to go on about too. You look at a group of files, and some group would say, well, only 20% were unidentified. And like he used to like to point out, how many does it take to make the point, that this could be the ETH? One case,
Yeah.
That's
The
right.
threshold is one. Yeah.
So disclosure doesn't consider that. The answers are probably out there, and it could be sitting in a drawer in New Zealand. It could be here in Ottawa. It could be buried in that room that you see at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark down in some warehouse in the U.S. Or all of the above. And they don't even know they have it anymore. You know, I mean, new young trainees come in. This stuff isn't passed on. When I see the behavior, even in what I considered a rather silly book there with Bill Corso, when you see how they kept it in the drawer and held these things to their chest, you know, nowadays people working in these positions, their successors, they don't even know what they had. This stuff is
I
is getting dust.
I can even see physical material being lost over time. Anomalous
Sure.
physical material from a UFO, call it a crash or
Hmm.
a landing or whatever, being put in a
Hmm.
drawer or a case or a filing cabinet somewhere and just over time being lost,
Sure.
Hmm.
Yeah. Like archaeological
as vital
finds.
as it might be.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's so little fresh thinking going on, and I must say this is one of the reasons. And when Michael says, well, I'm a fan of Ali, well, guilty is charged. I don't embrace every idea or anything, but I mean, for example, when somebody kept saying, well, why would these things keep crashing or whatever, I loved it. And somebody raised the question one day, and he just butt in and said, maybe they're supposed to. Well, there's a concept. And yes, it's a bit odd, and we're not going to go down that whole argument. But you know what? It showed how little fresh thinking and open minds there are in this.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
correct. You can
Hmm.
speculate all day long. And
Sure.
Hmm.
Woody Allen once wrote that maybe UFOs just like to hover. So aliens are going to do an alien thing. They're
Hmm.
not going to do a human thing or by human
Well, that's
logic
right.
necessarily.
It's actually
Yeah.
surprisingly on point, actually,
Yeah,
typical
we've
Woody
made
Allen.
that great mistake. We do with so many things. We try to anthropomorphize everything, whether we're
Right.
Right.
examining animals or aliens or whatever. Biggest mistake right out of the block,
Right.
right?
Try that with a sea sponge. See where that'll get you. Yeah. It's
Mm.
just not gonna work. It doesn't
I mean, I
Yeah.
even
can't
breathe.
even
It just
explain
sits
why a
there all day.
cat does various things,
Exactly.
and the
Well, yeah,
Bigfoot does it
Exactly.
all the
exactly.
time.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's
And
fascinating is not the answer. What's fascinating is the experience. I don't know if we'll ever get a straight answer. That's why I think disclosure is a bit of a pipe dream, and it's full
Hmm.
of false operatives. Uh,
yeah,
what
the
I
thing
what
is,
I lament is I'll just finish with this thought. What I
yeah,
lament is the lack of good old fashioned investigation, not speculation, not aggrandization, not like all this crap,
yeah.
but good old fashioned. And Chris, you're the kind of guy that does the boots on the ground,
Well,
the
I,
fingertips in the files, like that. You find new information, and you're not
yeah.
necessarily looking for answers. You're just looking.
Well, sometimes you know the expression I've used, and I think this actually is mine. Sometimes when you go looking, you don't find what you're looking for, but you find something better. And I've had this happen many times over the years, and I could go on and tell many tales. We don't have time, and I'm not going to do that. But when somebody calls me from the disclosure group and says maybe I should just stop, I wouldn't dare. It's too much fun. That's the thing. It's the journey too. It's the search, and I just live for those moments when you're truly surprised and you find that file or you speak to the person and they give the totally unexpected answer and the hair does stand up on your neck. Those are the moments that's the payoff. That is the payoff.
Yeah, I can't deny that at all. I have a number of cases of objects, and I'll give one example now. Would be objects shaped like jewels, and these kind of objects have been reported for since 70s, since 1947, Kenneth Arnold, but they look like cut jewels on a diamond ring, tetrahedron shaped or octahedron shaped. They make no sense. They don't generate lift. They don't have wings. They don't have a source of propulsion. But yet people keep reporting seeing these things on an irregular basis for all those years. And you come up with a case, and I compare it to another jewel case from 50 years before, and the objects are operating in exactly the same way. It makes no sense, but yet they're reported.
Yeah. Yeah, we've seen that, Michael, here in Nova Scotia, where we have like trends that are that buck the, what you find within the literature or the latest documentary. But you hear it so much, it has to be people have to be reporting what they're seeing at the very least. You know what I mean? And like you say, Rob, it makes no sense. But what does that even mean? Like we're applying it to a standard that probably shouldn't be applied. Really?
Correct. Well, people will say, well, it doesn't have wings. What generates the lift? It doesn't have an exhaust of material it's expelling to get propulsion in the opposite direction. So obviously the witness is making this thing up. This didn't occur. It just can't exist.
Right.
But it keeps being reported.
Right. Yeah.
Well, something, I look at the logic of a 4-year-old. I once went down to look at some video in Cape Breton down one end of our province here. And somebody had shot some video of something passing over the strait of water there. And when I got down, it was a beautiful home way up on a big high hill. And at the bottom of the hill, there was a 4-year-old boy playing in the mud in the summer, and he had a plastic dinosaur with him. And he saw me, and he jumped up, and I could see the mother waving at the top of the hill. And I started walking up this hill toward the home. And he starts walking beside me, and he says, "I know why you're here." And I said, "Why am I here?" And he said, "Because Mom shot a video of a UFO, and you come to see it." I said, "How do you know it was a UFO?" He said, "Oh, I seen it. It was a UFO." He goes, "It had no door."
Oh, wow.
The point being that a 4-year-old had preconceptions and, about what a UFO should be, right? By the way, when I got to the house and looked at it, it was a video. Somebody had obviously shot helium in a large dark garbage bag, and it was simply tumbling and floating across
Oh,
the
wow.
strait. But the boy had a preconception, 4 years old, preschool, and the audience was contaminated. So I think, whether it's that 4-year-old or whether it's an expert that's been in the field or someone from the disclosure movement, that we make these mistakes, right? We anthropomorphize, we project, we have lots of expectations. And, Woody Allen is right. It's that simple. Now, I'm going to tell you, we're going to have great fun. I'm hoping it's a chance to jump to something coming up. I'm hoping we don't seem to remember when we did actually physically meet in the past, Rob, but I'm hoping that this October, this is time for that shameless plug for the upcoming SHAG HARBOUR UFO XPO. And the third time we're hoping is the charm, because the last 3 times we sold a bunch of tickets and had to refund them because we were afraid that we'd get everybody here and either they couldn't cross the border or the venue in Yarmouth would say, "Oh, we're held down to 50% capacity," and we sold out. So hopefully this is the year, because if it isn't, well, I don't know. I think it would
Yeah,
be
I
a
think
missed
it'll be good.
opportunity because I'm so looking forward. I think we're going to pull it off. I'll tell you, everybody here is just, ready for something. Our country has been a little more restrictive, I think, than the U.S. and some other places, and too quick to react to every change in the stats when it came to that virus and its many variants. So hopefully this is here, because we're going to have a chance to sit down. That's the thing I always enjoy most, when I used to go to the conferences down south, is, the chance between presentations to sit down and pick one another's brains in the lobbies. There's so many great memories of that. And it'll be a chance to chew all this stuff over and learn, and connections are made, and we've been able to help one another. So hopefully, and anybody that wants to know more about that and the chance to meet Rob in person, there it is. Oh, there we go. Our producers got that up. The Shag Harbor UFO Expo site, it's at shagharbourUFOXPO.com. And if you look at that, it's got all the gory details about what's up and coming. And I'll say one more thing before we turn this back to Rob or Mike and the time we have left to go, whatever, is, you often hear these superlatives about why this is the conference, but this one is unique. And here's what makes it unique, is I don't think there's too many others you can go to where you can meet the speakers. You can go in terms of Shag Harbor and the people that are going to touch on that in different ways, where the next day we're going to take you to the actual site. You can meet the actual witnesses who were there. You can meet the experts, and we're going to take you right there. The only thing we can't do is take you back in time, so that these stories, you can actually see them in perspective. And unlike some of the other crash scenarios, for example, there's no controversy as to where this happened. We know right where it happened. We'll take you there. Hopefully the weather's good. It usually is in the fall. It's our one dependable season. And that's it. So hopefully anybody who's interested can go down. They can meet Rob, all the other great researchers that are going to be there, Nick Pope, Debbie Ziegelmeyer, etc. And just go to the website. You can find it all out. So,
I got a
Rob,
question for Rob. Rob, what's new on your plate? What are your plans in the future, in the immediate future, the midterm future? Where would you like to go with your work?
Well, the work sort of proceeds down a certain track that I don't have too much control over. I continue to look at sightings that MUFON records and investigates each month from a statistical point of view and from a UFO report content point of view. I'm hoping someday to put together some kind of a book that might bring out some of these theories or interconnections between cases that I've been finding over years. It's nothing earth-shaking, however, and I would maybe like to get some of the new cases out because they're not talked about too much. But I do edit the MUFON journal each month, so at the beginning of every month, this month is no exception, I have the articles to go through and to help edit them and put them together for the magazine. That takes up a lot of time. And then we just got done with our board meeting where Chris, I saw Debbie Ziegelmeyer. So she's looking forward to being at the UFO Expo. So
oh yeah,
my
yeah, she's been a
life, at least
guest.
from a UFO point of view, continues along a sort of a railroad track to a certain extent.
Right. Well, I do hope that you do write that book, Rob. I think that would be great. And when you said nothing exciting, I think is the word you used. Actually, I think we need a little less excitement and a little more nuts and bolts. And so if you're going to find
Probably right.
correlations, right? If you're going to find correlations from longitudinal data, which is kind of like where I think what you could contribute, I think that's like a hell of a lot better than listening to Art Bell talk about the Nephilim.
Yeah, or the
He's
secret
dead now.
space program.
Or the secret
But
space
I do
program.
talk with Mark Rodiger a lot, and I see that there are plans on the horizon now to make up instrumentation packages. And Avi Loeb speaks about one of them, but Mark speaks about a different one that he's involved with. And these have a potential of giving us some of the kind of information I think you'd like to see, Mike, in terms of scientific data picked up by a variety and an array of instruments.
Right, something that we can get our teeth into and find information out from the data. Absolutely, we talked about that. About hopefully, eventually, this show will generate some funds that we can use to put our own research station together down in southwest Nova Scotia and perhaps other spots in the Maritimes, and it would be nice to contribute to a network of reporting systems.
Oh, it's needed.
Yeah, we'd love to
I
do
think
it. Southwest Nova is such a hot spot, that, Justin and I, and as Michael knows, like we had a sighting down there in 2018. We shot video. It was daytime, perfect sight conditions. It lasted an hour and 20 minutes.
Wow.
And
And that would have fallen
you
in the
know,
jewel category, by the way, Chris.
Oh, really?
yeah,
Wow.
Yes.
yeah. There, that footage we sent it to MUFON. There's a MUFON case. I filled out the paperwork on it and made sure that it was received. Um, but one of the things that's interesting, to flip back for a second to the disclosure thing, I know when in that release from the Pentagon, they said they wish there were ways and they could interact with the civilian community and look at other things. As a response to that, there was a video presentation I did with Garpan that was a response to that release that a number of researchers did here in Canada, including Chris Wachowski, myself, and others. And in that, I pointed out that sighting and listed the MUFON report number and said, you could go to MUFON. They have the data. And by the way, that end of the pine tree line, part of the NORAD radar facility, sat 5 miles away from the sighting. So you may hold that data. You may have what you seek already. Rob, it's been great having you here. And I hope that when that book comes out, you let us know, because we'll have you back. We hope to be here and flog that book for you.
Yeah, in the meantime, you'll have to look at the 50-year anniversary MUFON book that you guys showed earlier. That's out there, available through Amazon.
I will. Sure.
1969 to 2019, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because it started back like what was it called before it was MUFON?
It was called the Midwest Ufo Network.
Yeah, it goes way back to that, and some people say that was a splinter group actually from APRO in the beginning.
It was.
I don't know if that.
Beyond a doubt, yeah. Walt was an APRO member, and he took some members and groups with him, and started MUFON then in 1969.
Right.
Well, hopefully we get more of you in person this fall, and when the book comes out, we'll certainly have you back. Michael?
Yeah, looking forward to being with UFO both.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me be on the show. It's been great.
Oh, yeah, it's been a pleasure. Love it. Yeah.
Too short, but well worth the time.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right, folks. So as always, like and subscribe, like all the YouTubers say, and come back and see us weekly. We're gonna make these shows till we drop, with great guests like Rob Swiatek and others. We mentioned Debbie Ziegelmeyer. We've already aired the episode with Debbie, and there's more to come. So, folks, have a great day, evening, morning, whatever it is. We'll catch you on the flip side.